Up next for us, the art of Francie Ashforth honors her family legacy of both land stewardship and art, as well as appreciation of, in her words, the simple beauty of it through observation. So she spends a lot of her time outdoors, hiking, fly fishing, studying land and water. Her work has been shown in Canada, in Europe, across the US, in galleries, and also in small museums. So she's worked in partnership on a number of books. I'm going to advance this a little bit. We'll see what I can remember from memory. There we go. In 2017, she published a portfolio of her prints. It was titled Water and Words. So you can imagine it was not only those prints, but also her thoughts on water conservation. She's also collaborated with a good friend on a book called Headwaters, and that recently won the National Outdoor Book Award, as well as 2 prominent design awards. And she's currently working with Orion Magazine on a project that's going to focus on the impacts of flooding. Her hope is that both her images and her observations on land and water will ultimately inspire respect for both the grit and the beauty that is found in landscape. So please welcome artist Francie Ashforth.
Thank you. Thank you, Erica. I am simply fascinated by the land. I'm an observer of the landscapes I find myself in, whether hiking, fly fishing, or breaking trails through deep snow. I research a great deal about land history, geology, water, and the flora and fauna of the land. I understand the importance of art within the environment and the role art plays in sharing ideas through imagery and storytelling. All art makes a difference. The visual arts, photography, filmmaking, writing, poetry, music, all of the arts convey unique forms of communication, both gritty and beautiful. Ideas get passed along between generations. Color is a huge component of art. Color can dictate our mood and outlook on just about everything we do. Colors have deep histories, origins that come directly from the earth. Color and pigments are important natural resources that have been integral in shaping our various cultures. Without natural resources, we simply would not thrive. We are without question a part of the landscape, a landscape that deserves our respect. We've taken a great deal from the land and are understanding daily the importance and need of giving back. I'm just going to touch on a few natural resource stories, specifically materials that I use in my studio. I always try and understand where my materials come from because I feel that having the knowledge behind what I use gives my work a lot more meaning. This is an image of just rocks and pigments taken from an eyewitness book of rocks and minerals. But I'm going to refer to a book. In her book, Color, The History of the Palette, Victoria Finlay travels to the far reaches of the globe to trace where certain colors come from. Her journey to the mountains of Afghanistan leads her to the heavily guarded caves where the highest quality lapis lazuli, right there, has been extracted for centuries. Lapis is a deep blue metamorphic rock that for eons has been coveted, worshipped, and mined. Lapis was first imported to Europe during the Middle Ages. When ground down, lapis creates ultramarine, the finest of blue pigments. It was often deemed more precious than gold and highly desired by painters such as Michelangelo, Vermeer, and Titian. It was so highly cherished that it was often called the blue of the heavens. Lapis is shown, if you can sort of see the color, much more famous than azurite. So anyway, I draw almost every day, and one of my other favorite material stories has to do with sheep and pencils. I'm sorry I don't have a picture of sheep or pencils. During the 1500s in northern England, lore has it that there was a mighty storm that uprooted a large oak tree. When a local shepherd discovered the fallen oak, he peered into the ground and saw a glistening black substance. And unbeknownst to him, he had found the purest stash of graphite so far discovered in the world. The local shepherds began marking their sheep's backs with chunks of this dark gray stone as a way to designate their flocks. Graphite began to be used for many things. Ingenuity ensued, and string was wrapped around thin chunks of graphite to form the first pencils. By the 17th century, wood-encased graphite and pencils were manufactured with much the same design that we have today. News traveled, and the art schools of Italy, of course, wanted to import this new pencil. Graphite is a pure form of elemental carbon. It's shiny, dark, and gray, and very soft, and provided a wide range of grays and blacks for drawing, a tonal variety not found in silver point or Conte crayon, and much sturdier than charcoal. Pencils were portable and in time available to everyone. Pencils are still manufactured in northern England by the Derwent Cumberland Pencil Company. And I wish I'd known about the story of graphite years ago when I was hiking there. It truly is hard to imagine our lives without pencils, which brings us to paper. It's really hard to imagine where we'd be today without either papers or pencils. About 2,000 years ago, a Chinese court official mixed some bark, hemp, and old fibers with water, and after mashing it and spreading it out to dry in the sun, he had literally formed the first paper. It would take 300 years for this secret to make its way to what we know today as the Middle East, and another 500 years before the first paper mill was built in Spain. America didn't mill its own paper until the early 1700s. Paper is most commonly made now with wood pulp and recycled paper. Cotton fabric was just not the renewable resource that wood was. There is so much history to the manufacturing of paper, and if truly interested, I suggest you read Mark Kurlansky's book that's just titled Paper. In my studio, I use paper that has cotton content, rice content, and even paper that's made from recycled polypropylene pellets called UPO. Waterproof and durable, it's got a remarkably smooth surface, and a few of my paintings that I'll show here today are on UPO. Karst is a relatively new paper made from recycled crushed stone. It's also waterproof and durable, and I really do need to order some because it comes in notebooks you can put in a backpack. These are just some ingenious methods of recycling and repurposing that continue to make new resources available to us. But what about the role of art in actually helping to preserve landscape? There were a number of groundbreaking artists who helped do just that, and I'll mention a few people who were pivotal in combining both art and conservation, specifically here in the US during the 19th century, a time when the national parks that we all know so well were just beginning to become established. This is an image of a Thomas Moran painting. Thomas Moran of the Hudson River and Rocky Mountain School of Artists began his career as an illustrator, and he worked for Scribner's magazine. He chose to draw his images instead of the traditional methods of etching and engraving. These illustrations were the primary way of sharing the beauty of remote landscapes in magazines such as Scribner's and Harper's. Most of the general public back then did not travel long distances, and these publications were their only connection that they had to the images of faraway places. It's amazing to think that personal cameras weren't available to the general public yet. Large format cameras were cumbersome, not truly portable, and mainly used in indoor portrait studios. The Kodak company wouldn't promote its first personal camera until 1888. In 1871, Moran and photographer William Henry Jackson joined the U.S. Geological Survey on a 6-week expedition to the remote wilderness known as Yellowstone. Yellowstone, everyone knows Yellowstone. By the way, Moran used graphite and watercolor in that piece. This is an image of Jackson had taken a photograph of Thomas Moran. I don't think you'd be allowed to do this today, standing at the hot springs that are along the Gardner River. This was taken in 1871. They visited over 30 sites and documented their experiences, and Moran sketched and took notes and painted, and Jackson hauled his large camera and hundreds of glass plates over rough terrain in a horse-drawn wagon. He was extremely ingenious when developing his work in the field, something not many photographers had attempted yet. Moran and Jackson were a creative team, and their paintings, drawings, and photographs provided visuals that went beyond written description, images of remarkable landscapes that easily persuaded President Grant and Congress to establish Yellowstone as the first national park in 1872. Edward S. Curtis was a very young photographer at the time, and this is a photograph of Princess Angeline, who was Chief Seattle's daughter. Curtis he was introduced to photography early on, and after moving to Seattle, he became enamored with the landscape of the Pacific Northwest. He first met Princess Angeline, a Chief Seattle's oldest daughter, in 1895. She lived on the edge of the lake right near Seattle. She was one of the last remaining members of the Duwamish tribe to live in the Seattle area, and she agreed to let Curtis photograph her a few months before she died. His early photos, including the princess, started to earn him a great deal of recognition. He was invited as photographer on an expedition to Mount Rainier, and eventually was chief photographer on expeditions to Alaska, the Southwest, and Montana, where he photographed and immersed himself among the Blackfoot Confederacy. In 1906, the banker J.P. Morgan offered Curtis payment to produce a series of photographs on Native Americans. Morgan, of course, desired to own quite a few, and he wanted 1,500 of these photographs. Curtis received no salary for developing the work, and Morgan's sum barely covered the travel costs. But for Curtis, the project snowballed into a 20-year passionate endeavor. He found extra funding and journeyed across the West and the Pacific Northwest, Alaska, and British Columbia, and he lived with many tribes, recording their songs, learning their languages, and witnessing ceremonies when allowed. He noted stories, art, and everything about their cultures, and he eventually published 222 complete sets of photographs, with his introduction to each simply stating, "The information that is to be gathered respecting the mode of life of one of the great races of mankind must be collected at once, or the opportunity will be lost." This is a photograph along the Salish coast. It's called Homeward. Curtis had such foresight, and his work is a tremendous tribute to Native Americans and their land and culture. We can't go back in time to regain what is lost, but we do have remarkable collections of art that help us to appreciate what came before us. I was introduced to Curtis's photography as a young child, and those images have stayed with me forever. Whenever I walk the land, I try to imagine those who have come before me. There are many examples of how we need to better honor Native Americans and their ancestral lands. One that I'm familiar with is in southwestern Alaska, a place I've been fortunate to visit a number of times. I think of how hard the Yupik tribes of Alaska have worked to defend their ancestral lands and salmon culture against the impending proposed pebble mine. This fight has been ongoing for 25 years. With recent positive resolutions in place, perhaps their culture will be able to remain somewhat intact. Bristol Bay and southwestern Alaska are wild habitats filled with ecological diversity. They are the premier source of where the salmon we purchase comes from. Tribal elders, photographers, salmon fishermen, and ecologists have all shared their stories of this rich landscape. And they have reminded me numerous times to write yet another letter in support of both salmon and their way of life. The Yupik salmon culture and salmon nation, as it's called, is not only important to Alaska, but it's a massive ecosystem and a food source, frankly, for our entire world. At age 12, Ansel Adams received his first camera. It was an Eastman Kodak Brownie gifted by his father during their first trip to Yosemite. Adams was in awe of Yosemite's beauty and focused completely on capturing what he saw. He developed his first photographs with the Sierra Club and returned to Yosemite many times with more professional gear. The Department of the Interior eventually hired him to take photographs of all the national parks, and he traveled through many states to do so. At the time of his first visit to Yosemite was already an established park, but Adams worked tirelessly over his lifetime to protect the land surrounding Yosemite. He was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1980 for his desire to preserve landscapes he loved. As an advisor to the Museum of Modern Art, Adams helped establish the photography department, bringing photography to a higher level of institutional significance. Adams was mentored by the famous photographer Alfred Stieglitz. And in a letter to Adams, Stieglitz stated, "It is good for me to know that there is Ansel Adams loose somewhere out there in this world of ours." And that brings us to Georgia O'Keeffe. Stieglitz was married to Georgia O'Keeffe, and O'Keeffe and Ansel were, O'Keeffe and Ansel were great friends who shared a deep affinity for landscape. O'Keeffe shifted her time from New York City to the Southwest, falling in love with that vast arid landscape after a visit to Taos in 1929. She was enamored with the cliffs of red and yellow rock formations. She collected bones and skulls, and she eventually made her home at Ghost Ranch on land that bordered a friend's 21,000-acre holding. These friends, Arthur and Phoebe Pack, were some of our country's first environmentalists, as Arthur was the editor of Nature magazine. They used one of Georgia's skull drawings for the logo of Ghost Ranch and were enamored with her paintings. She spent a great deal of time exploring the mountains around her and was particularly taken by the light and colors of the desert. It was her home and studio for over 40 years until her death in 1986. And by 1998, her property was declared a national landmark. Today, Ghost Ranch is a retreat for artists, writers, and visitors, and its landscape is a dedicated Park Service national natural landmark. It's not hard to envision the impact O'Keeffe's work has had on us all. She's another remarkable artist whose work paid deep attention to the land. This is called Ram's Head with White Hollyhock and the Little Hills, and this is the Little Hills review from her studio, and that was painted in 1935. So what does all this have to do with our conversation here today, and how does this relate to what I do as an artist? Well, we are all concerned about the environment and about the footprint that we create during our daily lives. We all have different interests, talents, and passions, and the gift I received as a child was being raised in a large artistic family who spent time outdoors. My grandparents' farm was my early geographic center, a place that provided me with an important mix of land stewardship and creativity in a landscape that I knew really well. I read a great deal and have been influenced by many authors, but these words from Barry Lopez have resonated with me for years. To really come to an understanding of a specific American geography requires not only time, but a kind of local expertise, an intimacy with place few of us ever develop. If you want to know, you must take the time. This is a coastline image, a series of water studies I did. They're 30 by 30, and this one is a direct reflection on the southwestern coast of Alaska. My goal has been to take the time to get to know and study landscapes that intrigue me. I continue to visit the theme of the horizon line over and over again. A definition of horizon I always refer back to states, the line marking that apparent junction of earth and sky. And the apparent horizon refers to all of our individual range of outlook, experience, and knowledge. Ooh, that one's really hard to see. It's called Blueprint Waterline, and this is actually ultramarine blue ink. I've been fortunate to work with amazing writers, conservationists, river guides, filmmakers, curators, and artists. All of these experiences have enriched my outlook and helped guide me towards my next place of study. I will always be focused on water, watersheds, geology, and culture within landscape. And I'm fascinated by and have great respect for the ocean, but oddly I feel much more comfortable along rivers or up high in the mountains. This is an image of the Bigwood River, and it's a basalt canyons that we were floating through. And that's actually painted on Yupo paper. To me, some of the most starkly beautiful places are deserts and ancient inland seabeds. Fragile yet tough, these desolate areas, once overlooked, oddly hold some of the most coveted resources and minerals now used for technologies and devices manufactured today. I've studied areas of Great Salt Lake and areas of the Great Basin. I've revisited Mount Monadnock in southern New Hampshire numerous times as it was the first mountain I hiked up as a child. And this is called the Billings Fold. It's a geological, really amazing cliff on Mount Monadnock. Henry David Thoreau visited Mount Monadnock frequently, and it seems I've followed his path a few times up mountains and along rivers in Maine. During a 5-day canoe trip through the North Maine woods, I was fortunate to paddle with a group of artists and philosophers, and we discussed changes in the environment and followed the path that Thoreau took in the 1850s. We also saw rusted remnants of the logging industry as we floated south past Mount Katahdin. The North Maine woods are still remarkably remote and wild, but there are strong collaborations between conservation and timber entities help maintain this delicate balance with this 3.5 million acres that borders Canada. I don't know, perhaps Thoreau's notes and observations in some way helped preserving these New England landscapes. Oops, we're a little off. That's a boulder from Redfish Lake. And this is done all in graphite. And this is graphite ink. I'm now studying the Snake River Plain in southern Idaho. Lava flows, prairies, basalt canyons, a landscape that was mainly formed during the Pleistocene's massive Lake Bonneville flood. These are the Shoshone-Bannock lands, rugged, vast terrain that they navigated so well. These lands also usher one of the largest antelope migrations in the US. These are the geographies I find fascinating, and I'm a magnet to the edges of places, to ecotones where habitats and cultures merge and share the most diversity in nature. I've borrowed a few words from Pam Houston's beautiful book, Deep Creek, because I too am an optimist. She says, and I imagine sometimes often we will get it wrong, but I'm not celebrating the earth because I'm an optimist, though I am an optimist. I'm celebrating because this magnificent rock we live on demands celebration. I'm celebrating because how in the face of this could I not? In a nutshell, to me, oh dear, sorry. That's the Camas Prairie. In a nutshell, to me, our future in conservation is about hope, respect, ingenuity, and knowledge. I share the grit and beauty because that's what I see as an artist. I suppose my goal is that my images will help instill a desire for respect that reminds the viewer to honor what this land continues to share with us every day. Let's appreciate this earth with integrity and commitment so in turn it can continue to help sustain us. And here is a lucky stone for all of us, and that's graphite on paper. Thank you. I think I have, was told 2 questions if anyone's interested in asking a question, so. Okay, well, thank you. Oh, sorry, gal in the front.
Hi. So I'm just interested because you study the land and because you do certain areas over and over again where you're studying and drawing. Do you think that by doing that you're raising awareness of things in our environment that people might not notice, that, the wider public, and by bringing things that may have changed in the fact that you're depicting it at this time versus earlier times?
I think that's part of it. I think it's also, I just have to keep revisiting places, especially now since I'm studying a lot of places out west and my main studio is here in Connecticut. And I seem to bring it back to my studio, but it's very hard to talk to people in New England about what's going on in the West, about the plight of water, about, yes, we're thrilled. There's a ton of snowpack this year, but that's not going to help Great Salt Lake in the long term. So, and wildfires. Very interesting. Listen to the news. There's a little fire in New Jersey the other day, and everybody was talking about how big it was, and all I could think about was the fires of the West and how those are. Some of them are closer to 1 million acres versus 350 acres. So it's just trying to make people aware, I guess. We all live in a specific place that we know really well, but if we don't go visit other places, we don't get to know those places well. So maybe that's part of my challenge. It's definitely part of my challenge, for sure. Thank you. So. Okay, I think that's good. Thank you very much.